But recently last week, I finished Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. Finally, I don't know why it took me so long. You know, when I was like 12, I watched half of the original Full Metal Alchemist, okay? Because there's like one version and then there's like the reboot Brotherhood that was done, I think, in 2003. And I watched half of the original version. I don't know why. But if you're unfamiliar with Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, it is famed, okay, in the world of anime and manga as one of the greatest pieces of shonen storytelling of all time. If you go onto Google right now and you type it in to your search bar, best anime, I promise you there's somebody out there making an argument for more Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood in this system, okay, in this world. And if you've never watched Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood before, the general gist of the story is it follows two brothers in a world that utilizes a rule-based power system, alchemy, okay, which is the discussion topic of our video, which basically has two essential rules. We will dive into these later. The law of equivalent exchange being one, and they basically make this huge catastrophic mistake, okay? And they suffer the consequences of making this mistake and this loss, and they travel through this highly militarized society in search of a way to correct this mistake whilst interacting with the idea of knowledge, ambition, authority, and power using this rule-based power system of alchemy. Nonetheless, so alchemy has a very, very special place in my heart. And ever since I got into the anime, the power system just was so num 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 to me, okay? Now, the power system is governed, again, by two main rules, like I said before. We have something, number one, which is the law of equivalent exchange. And this is something that mirrors real-world chemistry and real-world science. And a direct quote from the show, humankind cannot gain anything without first giving something in return. To obtain something of equal value must be lost. That is alchemy's first law of equivalent exchange. And this is so fundamental and powerful, not only to the power system, but also to the philosophical and moral questions that the power system allows and prompts the watcher or the reader, whatever format you're engaging with this story in, to think about. The second one is a slightly more taboo law, and it's like one cannot perform human transmutation, because what can you give that is equivalent and in exchange of the value of human life? Power systems, I think about this a lot, okay, across many different medias. I think if I could create my own degree or course, I would do a course or degree and pay nothing for it. I already pay enough in student tuition, and a course for power systems I'm studying. I'm sure there is an English literature course somewhere. And so I would largely group power systems into hard or soft power systems. And by hard power systems, I mean power systems that are completely rule-based. They are clear and explicit rules, and it's consistent. And power, or the ability to extend your power, is derived from understanding the system itself. So alchemy is a beautiful, gorgeous example of this. If you're a reader and you've read Mistborn, Allomancy is another good example. You could potentially argue that the use of bending in Avatar: The Last Airbender is an example of a hard-based power system. I want to explicitly make this distinction. Now, just because the power system is very rule-based and there's structured and there's clear logic, rules, and limitations, that does not mean there can't be some sense of divination involved in the rule-based power system. Whether the power system comes from or is imbued with the sense of divine or the spirit world, or people have a natural ability or talent, that's like not improbable, I don't think. I think you can still have a rule-based power system that is derived from some mystical, magical source. It doesn't have to be grounded in something real and tangible that might feel akin to some kind of science. Okay. And then you have something more softer, things like a will-based power system, okay? Rules are vague and they're flexible, and the limits change on narrative need rather than things that are fixed and established quite early on in the story. And I would say that power systems and shows or TV shows or stories that utilize a softer or will-based power system are more concerned about the expression of a character rather than the rigid arcs of a story, okay? I think a good example is like the Force in Star Wars. I haven't consumed that much Star Wars media, but every single time I'm just like, what is this Force? Somebody in the comments, because you guys are so smart, somebody in the comments is going to write me this most beautiful explanation of what the hell the Force is in Star Wars, or somebody is going to be like, yeah, we don't get it either. Another good example is like magic and fairy tale. There are rules-ish and it can be taught, but at this point, we kind of know it's a vibes thing. It's like we care more about the characters having a very like cool aura moment, or something being so emotionally depth and charged and provides the meaning that friendship and camaraderie is everything, rather than the power system making sense. Power systems that have limitations provide amazing tension in the story. You know what the limits are. Your characters know what the limits are. And unless you introduce some kind of break of the rule or something a little bit more complex, then it builds tension. This is actually the limit of what we're able to do in this world. How is the character going to overcome this? How are we going to get around this? Or does a character have to sacrifice some kind of moral aspect of themselves to allow them to access a certain amount of power system? Okay, think, curses or like dark magic. Does a character have to transition and do something that is taboo and unnecessary and potentially morally corrupting? It tells you so much about the character. It tells you so much about the story. And Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood does this well by seeing how different characters interact with alchemy, how they use alchemy, how they justify teaching alchemy, how they justify spreading on who gets to do alchemy and who doesn't get to do alchemy. Again, you can tell a lot about their character, about their limits and what goes far and what's not. Of course, there is the taboo of human transmutation, but some people don't listen to the taboo. That taboo does not matter. We take it to be very famous. I think it's like episode 12 or 13. It's very early on. It's very disconcerting, okay, with the chimera dog and the dad that basically uses his daughter in an experiment to kind of understand, I think it is a form of human transmutation. And we all look at this character with such disgust, but it tells you so much about the characters, how they react to that situation, how we feel about the situation. Do we think it was too far? Do we not think it's too far? I love that alchemy within its rule-based power system and the way it interacts with the world. And of course, the law of equivalent exchange and how it's structured makes you think. Okay, it makes you question things. It's not just a power-based system. It's a moral and philosophical tool. What some might consider one of the biggest drawbacks of alchemy and the show, okay, is what I would arguably consider the strength in the power system. And this is where I really feel like I make my strong argument for why I think alchemy is one of the best power systems in anime. Bar the 52 episode, like calendar thing, which is so characteristic of the early 2000s anime, like everything from like 2003 to 2010, bar very few longer running shonen have 52 episodes. One of the biggest commentaries that I saw when I was kind of curling through Reddit, and also something that crossed my mind when I was trying to find a way to critique this power system, is, right, we might understand all of the possible ways to practice alchemy, but we still, at the end of the show, didn't really have a great understanding of why alchemy exists in the first place, where it comes from, particularly when the whole nature of the divine and truth enter the conversation. This, I believe or hope, is an intentional and beautiful choice. There are some things within the world that we, even in our own and even in this story, and probably reflected in millions of other stories across the world, don't fundamentally understand. There are things as humans, okay, whether you believe in the divine or not, that are beyond our understanding and our comprehension, okay? They just exist. They just are, okay? And you can kind of see this, and I think they begin to introduce this conversation through truth, quote unquote, or what some people might argue to be a representation of God, I don't know, or the universe per se, at the end of the series serves as a physical embodiment. Okay, I don't think truth is necessarily bad or evil, which is quite interesting because at the beginning of the show, it kind of painted as how could you do this to these two brothers? Okay, how could you make them suffer through this? Alchemy seems so wicked and evil. What is this thing governing how people do human transmutations? I don't think it's necessarily bad or evil. I think it is just a universal balance, okay? It's this absolute power that bestows and takes things out of balance, but rather does so to preserve the natural balance or the exchange of the universe. I think this is deeply interwoven into many Eastern philosophy and religion, and I think that is kind of why it leans that way in the discussion at the end. And I would be particularly interested if somebody from a more Western philosophy or a different religious perspective, I don't know the religion, or if the author practices a particular religion or trying to imbue a particular religion at the end of the story, but I'd be intrigued if that affects the way one perceives the ending of the story. And I do think it's quite interesting. The second thing I also find quite interesting as alchemy is not only just a power system, I think it is positioned to also allow us to morally question things, because the final equivalent exchange, does it feel necessarily equivalent? We get to the end of the show and Al, my love, my favorite character, okay, my baby, at the end of the show, sacrifices his soul for his brother to get his arm back. Okay. And first of all, this begins the question. Is that an equivalent exchange? The exchange of one's soul and one's place in the land of the living for an arm? You know? And then finally, Ed is willing to give up his ability to perform alchemy in exchange for getting his brother's body back, right? And now to some, and to many people when I was reading Reddit, and to myself, is this an equivalent exchange? Okay. And this is question then comes with the power system is what is the determiner of the value, right? What determines whether an exchange is equivalent? What determines whether an exchange is balanced? When we take it into chemistry and science and the law of conservation of mass per se, it's kind of more direct. 1 kilogram, if you use 1 kilogram of something, you most likely will get 1 kilogram as a product out. Whether it is the exact product you want, whether it dissipates into a gas, all of these different things play a factor. But in a closed system, if you reactants are 1 kilogram, you get 1 kilogram product, okay? There is a thing that we are using to quantify what is equivalent in this law of conservation of mass. But in this exchange where things are so moral and value and driven, how do we determine what is equivalent for the character? How does truth determine this? One can make this argument, and I personally think at this point, this is where the power system shifts from a storytelling tool to a more of a philosophical prompting tool. And I feel like at the end, when you make the shift, that's when everything or the tone of the whole anime kind of changes. Well, it changed for me. And it makes me think, I think there's a lot of moments across the show where this exchange feels unequal. It feels unequivalent to this person observing the story. This doesn't feel correct in exchange of this, or I wouldn't feel like this is equivalent for this. Okay. And one question I think here, as alchemy, I think is an allegory for power, is how much are you willing to sacrifice in exchange for something? Okay, the equivalency of this question changes from person to person. And through varying the exchanges happening, we as the audience are forced to question our own morality, our own value system, and the way in which we esteem the equivalency of said exchange. Okay, and it makes you question. In the end, Ed felt like the exchange of his ability to perform something that he deeply loves, cherishes, and has brought him so much value, it has also brought him so much pain, of course. Something that, has inherently been his selling point throughout the series. I am the full metal alchemist. I am able to do this. This is my bargaining chip in the world. I am fully willing to give this away because I understand that my value as a human being, my true inherent meaning and power in this world isn't attached to this ability to perform something. That is something that Ed, even though it's something deeply important to him, he sees that as an equivalent exchange, probably maybe an even unbalanced exchange, because he would happily give anything for his brother. Do you see the question here? But some people might not have made that same decision. Through different characters, Hohenheim and his battle with immortality, all of the different homunculi and their crave for, humanity, the author experiment, the dad and daughter, all of these little moments, all of these little things, even Mustang at the end taking the Philosopher's Stone in exchange for like all of these different little moments of things where we have to question whether one thing is worth the other, whether this is morally aligned and this is morally aligned. That is what alchemy serves as a philosophical tool and gives us as the reader, as the viewer, as the watcher to think about and ponder. What exchange is equivalent to you? What would you exchange in terms of power? How do you interact with this? And most importantly, why? Obviously, the writer kind of gives their own answer. I think at the end of the show, I haven't read the manga, but at the end of the show, I do think that the writer kind of starts to give a little bit of their point of view and perspective. Obviously, through the characters of Ed and Al and how they interact, they almost serve as the author's mouthpiece of what was the correct decision to make, how to make the correct decision. But of course, these things are here to prompt you to question, to make you think about it, okay? On the flip side, if we move a little bit away from the power system, one of my favorite parts is in the ending of the show, because I'm a lover girl, is the Ed and Winry confession moment, okay? Building up the entire show, okay? And Ed, when he's confessing to Winry, does this whole spiel of equivalent exchange, right? And it makes sense. He's like, I will give you half of my life in exchange for half of yours. The world is governed on this law of equivalent exchange. And it makes sense because his entire life has been governed by this alchemy. This whole story and the way we have viewed the lens of this story has been governed and pushed by this power system, okay? By the pursuit of power, by the pursuit of this, by this law of equivalent exchange. Remember the beginning, the law of equivalent exchange. Me and my brother thought this was the one law true to the whole of the universe, okay? Now, as you can see through this small moment and in multiple moments throughout the show, Winry does this thing, right? Winry, in a very comedic way, shuts down this logic. She says, I don't know what's wrong with you, all of you alchemists, okay? Right? I will give you like all of my life. I don't need it to be this equivalent give or take. It doesn't have to be transactional. And then she kind of gets flustered. She's like, maybe 90, maybe 85%, okay? Winry steps out of the alchemy power system. She steps out of this transactional nature of the law of equivalent exchange, if it's even transactional, if it's a balanced transaction system, okay? And she says that equivalent exchange isn't the only way to morally view the world. You know, having this you give and I take and I give and this take, and if I put this take and I put, and that's not the only way to view the world. And in fact, if you view the world in this way all the time, you probably wouldn't be able to experience the world into its fullest. It's a quiet breakdown, a quiet protest to the law that has governed the system and the story for so long, and provides him this notion, this idea that love is not transaction, but given freely to one, right? And it's been given arguably by so many people in his life so freely the whole time. Another character that I think examples this notion beautifully is Alphonse. So many times he's willing to sacrifice himself, and he doesn't second guess it, he doesn't question it, he doesn't think, I don't know if this is a fair trade, I don't know if this is well, and to him, it doesn't matter. Again, love is the defining piece in his character, Al, the defining thing. And that unbalances, according to the writer, according to this story, and my opinion, overrides the power system of alchemy, which I don't think is a negative thing if you have something that overrides this power system. Of course, I've gone on this whole spiel of how I believe limits are very important. But I think he's saying that, you know, when you're in the face of something that is incomprehensible as love, as something moving and something that drives people to do things that rarely makes sense, right? Something you can't even quantify, then the system of equivalent exchange, something that governs the law of alchemy, falls apart. Alchemy is one of the best power systems of anime and in anime, not because of its use. Of course, it's so cool and it's so logical and it's so amazing because it's so logical, and you can have real conversations about the systems and how far can the power go and all of this. It is a beautiful example of how a power system is not just something to create a narrative tool. It is something that can allow the reader, the watcher, the listener, the viewer to question things about themselves. It is something that serves as a vehicle for a philosophical question that drives the whole show. You know, what is an equivalent exchange? What is equivalent to one another? Is anything worth giving up for power? And is anything worth giving up your humanity for love? All of these different questions that the show drives and poses. But yes, guys, I hope you like this anime themed episode. I know I've done comic videos for the while. I've done two. I know I'm gonna do Superman. I'm gonna do Superman. Like, I feel bad. I'm doing Superman, and then I'm doing Zatanna, and then I'm doing Superman. In that order, okay? We have to do it in that order. But yes, thank you so much for watching. If you love some of these more philosophical leaning conversations, I'll link a couple of Female Genius podcast episodes down below, because I 100% think if you like the sound of that, you'll like the sound of some of those episodes, and you can listen while you're doing your things. And if not, you can check me out on TikTok, where I post a little bit more of these snippets of ideas in like really short bursts. That was so embarrassing. Ugh.